Good evening, friends, and welcome to the bonus video for May of a poem a day for 2026. I lost time again once I finished recording the poem for today, so that's just uploaded. It's currently 8:57, and here we are. I'm currently delving into the past, and this is going to sound really weird. I'm going for a book from the turn of the century. This book, the Children's Book of Books 2000. When I was at school, I hope they still do it. Every World Book Day, we would get a book token to go and spend on a book, either put towards the value of a book, or it was in W.H. Smith's, which I think doesn't even exist anymore. T.J. Jones, I think it's called now. So the book token was either £1 or it was a bit more. It was £1. I've just found the price on the back of the book. Book token was £1, and we could put that towards the cost of another book, or every book day, places like W.H. Smith, Waterstones, similar, would have a World Book Day book. And it's not very thick. It's a slim little book, and as you can see, it's seen better days. This book is 26 years old. I was 12 when I got this book. 12, 13. It has been watermarked, like it's, you can kind of see it. This book got wet. It's seen better days. It's mouldy at the back. But it's a book of short stories. And at the front of the book, there is an introduction, which I'll read for you. It says, "Welcome to the Children's Book of Books 2000. This is the third year that World Book Day has been celebrated with a special book that you can buy with a free £1 book token. This year the book is rather different. Here are 9 stories and poems from 9 brilliant writers, which I guess you will read and want to keep and read again. Even so, they are just a small sample of the thousands of books that we shall all be reading on World Book Day and the days to come. It's good to read." And this is signed and illustrated by Quentin Blake, who was the children's laureate at the time. Love Quentin Blake. Absolutely fantastic author. So 9 authors, 9 stories, poems, real collection of stuff. There is, I know which one I want to read to you, but there is one that I just, it's very brief, so you'll another twofer here for you. It's 2 pages. The next story is then the one that I'm going to read for you, which is a bit longer. So, it's a poem. This is Little Red Riding Hood and the Wolf by Roald Dahl. As soon as Wolf began to feel that he would like a decent meal, he went and knocked on Grandma's door. When Grandma opened it, she saw the sharp white teeth, the horrid grin, and Wolfie said, "May I come in?" Poor Grandmamma was terrified. "He's going to eat me up," she cried, and she was absolutely right. He ate her up in one big bite, but Grandmama was small and tough, and Wolfie wailed, "That's not enough. I haven't yet begun to feel that I have had a decent meal." He ran around the kitchen yelping, "I've got to have another helping," then added with a frightful leer, "I'm therefore going to wait right here till little Miss Red Riding Hood comes home from walking in the wood." He quickly put on Grandma's clothes. Of course, he hadn't eaten those. He dressed himself in coat and hat. He put on shoes, and after that, he even brushed and curled his hair, then sat himself in Grandma's chair. In came the little girl in red. She stopped, she stared, and then she said, "What great big ears you have, Grandma." "All the better to hear you with," the wolf replied. "What great big eyes you have, Grandma," said Little Red Riding Hood. "All the better to see you with," the wolf replied. He sat there watching her and smiled. He thought, "I'm going to eat this child. Compared with her old Grandmama, she's going to taste like caviar." Then Little Red Riding Hood said, "But Grandmama, what a lovely great big furry coat you have on." "That's wrong," cried Wolf. "Have you forgot to tell me what big teeth I've got?" "Ah, well, no matter what you say, I'm going to eat you anyway." The small girl smiles, one eyelid flickers. She whips a pistol from her knickers. She aims it at the creature's head, and bang, 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 she shoots him dead. A few weeks later, in the wood, I came across Miss Riding Hood. But what a change! No cloak of red, no silly hood upon her head. She said, "Hello, and please do note my lovely furry wolfskin coat." I remember reading that as a preteen, or as a teen. I can't remember when World Book Day falls, and I just thought it was, as the kids would say these days, I thought it was peak. I think I've probably aged myself probably at least 2 decades, but I thought it was absolutely hilarious. Just I loved it. And yeah, it was utterly fantastic. And that is what I wanted to share with you. Before getting into this piece, please excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of my drink. Cass has already fallen asleep. This is a short story entitled "Aliens Don't Eat Bacon Sandwiches," and it's by an author named Helen Dunmore. This one stuck with me. I can't remember any of the other stories in this book, but this one has stuck with me for 26 years. I just love it. It's I think it's just fun. It's great. It's got a bit of everything, I think. My brother Dan has been making his own bacon sandwiches since he was 10 years old. It's not that he likes cooking that much. It's just that no one else knows how to make the perfect bacon sandwich. He'd get everything ready by the cooker first. Bacon, bread, tomatoes, ketchup, sharp knife. The bacon had to be fried fast so that it was crisp but not dried up. He'd lay it on one slice of soft white bread, smear it with ketchup, cover it with tomato slices, and then clap a matching white slice on top. Then he'd bite into it while the bacon was hot and the fat was soaking into the bread. Dad used to say that Dan would go to Mars and back if he thought there'd be a bacon sandwich at the end of it. Don't forget this. The bacon sandwich is important. Then there was the portable telephone. We should never have bought it, Mum said. I mean, I like talking to my friends on the phone, but Dan was something else. He was never off it. When he came home from school, he'd pick up the phone right away and call someone he'd only been talking to half an hour before. And they'd talk and talk and talk. Sometimes Mum would have to come in and stand by there, tapping her watch or mouthing, "Phone Bill," at him, but it never seemed to make much difference. Dan was a phone addict. I was cleaning my bike in the garden one day, and Mum and her friend Susie were talking about the phones and big bills and teenage kids. Susie said, "It's all right as long as you realise that teenagers aren't people at all, really. They're aliens from outer space. That's why they spend all their time on the phone. They have to keep in contact with other aliens who come from the same planet." I didn't take much notice of what Susie said at the time, but it came back to me later. Mum leaned back in her deck chair and laughed. She'd been out on a locational day, taking photographs. Mum's a photographer. She was working on a feature about corn circles. I expect you've seen pictures of them. Perfect circles in wheat. Much too perfect to have been made by wind or rain. There were more of them than ever that year, and nobody knew how they came. At first, the newspaper said it was a hoax. Reporters and photographers used to sit up and keep watch all night by cornfields to catch the hoaxers, but they never did. Somehow they'd get sleepy and doze off, and then when they jerked awake, the circle would be there, just as round as if it had been drawn with a compass. Mum could have stayed that night too. She was working with a journalist friend who'd bought a tent along. Mum talked to Dan and me about it. Then she decided not to. It was just a feeling she had that it wasn't a good idea. Dan and I always listened to Mum when she got feelings about things. Even I could remember how she'd said to Dad, just before he went on that last trip, "Do be careful, love. I've got a feeling about it. I wish you weren't going." Dad had worked for Intercell Airways on the crash investigation team. He was an instrument specialist. This time, he hadn't been investigating a crash, but several pilots had reported interference with their instruments over the Mojave Desert. They'd managed to correct the problems manually so far, but the airline was quietly panicking. Dad had been working on a computer model trying to find some pattern in what was going on. I don't remember much about that time, but Dan told me later that Dad had been up most of the night that week before he left. He was really worried. All he said to Dan and Mum was that the pattern kept coming up and he didn't like the look of it. Mum's feeling was right. Dad's plane crashed not far from Coyote Lake. Something went wrong with the instruments, they said. There'd been massive distortions caused by what looked like a powerful electrical storm. At least, that's what it looked like on the computer trace. But no storm showed up for hundreds of miles on the weather charts. I asked Mum if she thought the corn circles really were made by aliens, like people said. She frowned. Then she said, "I don't know, Tony. I don't believe that circles are made by UFOs landing. That would be much too obvious. The feeling I have is that we're being teased or tricked, as if someone or something is trying to distract us from what they're really doing." "What do you mean?" "It's hard to explain, but try to put yourself in their place. If there really are aliens trying to get a foothold on our planet, I think they'd do it in a way we'd hardly even notice. There'd be changes, but not huge ones. After all, there are millions of us on this planet, and only a few of them. They'd come in very gradually over the years. They wouldn't want to risk being noticed, not too soon. We'd be bound to notice, though, wouldn't we?" "Not necessarily. Think of burglars. Some break in through the front door with crowbars, but others come in pairs, pretending to be insurance salesmen. It's not till long after they've gone that you realise one of them's nipped upstairs and taken all your valuables. If there were aliens, they wouldn't want to seem different. They'd want to seem like us, part of normal life. So Mum thought the corn circles were there to keep us busy, to stop us noticing what else was going on. I shivered. Dan was 15 and a half, and I was almost 11. You wouldn't think we'd be friends as well as brothers, but we always had been. Dan told me things he'd never tell Mum. He knew I'd never grass on him. And if something made him sad, he could tell me that too. He had a music centre for his 15th birthday, much better than the one downstairs in the sitting room. He'd lie in his bed, and I'd lie on the floor, and we'd listen to his music, and he'd tell me about what was going on with his friends. Not all of it, but some. Enough. Dan had a Saturday job, so he always had money. And he talked to me about Genevieve. He knew I liked her. He'd had girlfriends before, but Genevieve was different. There was another clue that I didn't pick up straight away. It was about 5 o'clock, and Dan and I were home from school, but Mum wasn't back yet. The phone rang, and I answered it. It was Genevieve. She asked how I was, the way she always did. She even remembered that I'd had to take my budgie to the vet, and asked if he was okay now. Then she said, "Is Dan there, Tony?" "Yes, I'll just get him." I turned around. Dan was lounging in the doorway, watching me. "It's Genevieve," I said, holding out the phone. But Dan didn't take it. He just kept on looking at me. It's hard to describe what happened next. I hadn't really been thinking about what was going on, because I was just doing something I'd done loads of times before. Taking a call for Dan and passing it on to him. And since it was Genevieve, I knew he'd be pleased. But he wasn't pleased this time. He didn't react at all. I felt as if I was searching Dan's face for someone who wasn't there, like you'd search an empty house for a light in the windows. "It's Genevieve," I hissed, thinking perhaps he hadn't heard, and wishing I'd pressed the silence button in case Genevieve had. But Dan just shook his head, very slightly, as if he was making fun of me, or Genevieve, and I was left holding the phone. "I'm sorry, Genevieve," I gabbled. "He just went out, I think. I mean, I thought he was here, but he isn't." It must have sounded like a lie. But Genevieve isn't a suspicious sort of person. "Oh, that's okay, Tony," she said. "I'll try again later. See you." And she put the phone down. Her voice was just the same as it always was. You know how some people's voices make you feel good, even when things are about to happen? Genevieve had that sort of voice. Dan's voice was cold and irritated. I couldn't believe I was hearing him right. "I wish she'd stop bothering me," he said. "What?" "You heard. I said I wish she'd stop bothering me. That girl really bugs me. If she calls again, so you don't know when I'll be back." "No, never mind. I'll take the phone." He held his hand out for it. Darkness looked out of his eyes, and blankness. There was no Dan there at all. He took the phone and held it up as if he was going to dial straight away, the silver antenna poking out of the side of his head. I felt a shiver go through me. The antenna. Dan's dead eyes. Something scratched at the back of my mind, wanting to be let in. That's why they spend all their time on the phone, so they can keep in touch with all the other aliens. I stared at Dan, and he stared back at me, mocking, as if he knew something I didn't. And in a way, almost frightening. And then I heard Mum's key go in the front door lock. Dan stopped looking at me. By the time Mum called hello to us, he was already on his way back up the stairs, calling back, "Homework," as he went. That was strange too. Dan usually made Mum a cup of coffee when she got home from work. His bedroom door banged, with the sort of bang that tells everyone else to keep out. I waited to hear the music. Dan always turned on his music as soon as he got up to his room. But nothing happened. It was absolutely silent. as if there was no Dan in there at all. That was the first evening that Dan didn't eat supper. He'd been into Burger King with Alex on his way back from school. Mum didn't bother about it. She was tired and upset because she and her journalist friend had had an argument with their editor. The editor didn't like the idea of aliens coming in secretly while we were all busy with the corn circles. He wasn't going to run the feature unless they changed it. The next day, Dan said he had to finish a piece of coursework and could he take a sandwich and a glass of milk up to his room. I don't remember all the excuses for not eating after that, at breakfast and tea and supper. They were never the same twice. Dan had always been clever, but now he was cunning too. He emptied his wastepaper basket every day now, so there was no chance of Mum finding the sandwiches he hadn't eaten. It was hard to know how much Mum had noticed. She never said anything, and she carried on giving Dan dinner money as usual. It was 3 nights after the phone call from Genevieve that I couldn't sleep. My bedroom was next to Dan's, but I hadn't been into Dan's room for 3 days. Have you ever seen 2 magnets fighting one another with the invisible force field between them? There was one of those force fields at Dan's bedroom door. You couldn't see it, you couldn't touch it, but it was there. Even Mum found excuses not to go in there. She was collecting the dirty washing one afternoon, when Dan was late home, and she said, "I ought to have a sock search under Dan's bed." But she didn't go in. She hesitated by his door. Then she said, "No, he's old enough to sort out his own dirty washing." And she walked past into my room to change my duvet. I kept turning over and over in my bed. I was used to falling asleep to the sound of Dan's music, and I couldn't settle down in the silence. What was he doing? Was he sitting there, reading, working? I knew there wasn't anyone else in his room, though usually Dan had friends round a lot, and often they stayed late. None of his friends had been round for the past 3 days, and I don't know what he'd said to Genevieve, but she hadn't called again. I tossed back the duvet, and it flopped onto the floor. I found myself tiptoeing across the carpet, easing the door handle down, pulling the door open very gently. The landing light was on. Everything was quiet. Mum's door was shut too. 12:37 on my wristwatch. She'd be asleep. My heart thudded as I crept towards Dan's door. Yes, it was still there, the invisible hand pushing me away, saying I wasn't wanted there. But I wasn't going to take any notice this time. This was Dan, my brother. I took a breath and touched his door handle. Something fizzed on my fingers, like a tiny electric charge, like a rush of static electricity. I pulled my hand away and stepped back. Then I stopped myself. "It's only Dan," I told myself fiercely. "It's only Dan." This time, the prickle of electricity wasn't so bad. Or perhaps it was because I was expecting it. Very gently, I pushed the handle down. It didn't squeak or click. Then I pushed the door. As it opened, a narrow strip of light fell from the landing into the darkness of Dan's room. It lit up Dan's bed, which was opposite the door. It lit up Dan, who was sitting up in bed, fully dressed, reading in the dark. It lit up Dan's eyes as he turned to me, not at all surprised, as if he'd been expecting me, as if he'd seen me through the door. "Hi," he said, and turned a page. There was only one switch for the main light, and it was by the door. It was off. I opened the door wider, so that more light came in, and walked across to Dan's bed. Casually, I touched his bedside light. It was cold. It hadn't been on at all. He'd really been reading in the dark. Unless he'd been pretending. unless he was trying to trick me and he'd been sitting there with the book, waiting for me to come in. But then, how had he known I was going to come in? There wasn't an answer. There was only Dan sitting on his bed. He didn't look as if he liked me much. "I can't sleep," I said. "I'm going down to make some hot chocolate. Do you want some?" "No," said Dan. "A week ago, he'd have come down with me so I wouldn't make too much noise and wake up Mum. He'd have whipped up the chocolate the way he does." Suddenly, I had an idea. "I'm going to make a bacon sandwich," I said, and waited for Dan to say what he always said. "You make a bacon sandwich? Don't make me laugh. Let the man from the army do it." And then he'd make it for me. He didn't. But something went over his face. Just for a second, there was a flicker of the real Dan, and as soon as I saw it, I knew for sure that whoever else had been there for the past 3 days, it hadn't been Dan. Then his face went back to the not Dan face, the alien face. I felt the back of my neck prickle. Maybe it was the electricity tingling around the room. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement. It was the minute hand of Dan's electric wall clock, racing crazily round and round in a perfect circle. The thing inside my brother looked straight at me, daring me to say what I'd seen. The prickle ran up my arms and down. I'd run into a storm, just the way Dad had done. Only here it wasn't as strong. There was only one of them. I shook my head to clear the buzzing of my thoughts. Dan needed me. "I really fancy a bacon sandwich," I said again. "We've got all the stuff. White bread, tomatoes, ketchup, and Mum bought some back bacon yesterday." Something struggled in his eyes again, like the ghost of my brother. It wasn't winning. Dan wanted so much to come back, but he couldn't. There was something else there, something alien, and it was too strong for Dan. It meant to stay, and it meant to keep Dan out of his own body. But at least now I felt I knew what I was fighting. What we were fighting. Dan hadn't eaten anything for 3 days. I knew he hadn't. He must be hungry. For Earth food. Whatever was in him now didn't need food, but Dan did. And Dan would do anything for a bacon sandwich. Perhaps, if I could take him by surprise somehow and get him to eat, could that break whatever power this thing had over him? I didn't know, but it was worth trying. "See you downstairs if you change your mind," I said. "Our neighbours have a baby which cries in the night, so Mum goes to bed with cotton wool in her ears." Even so, I moved quietly as I lit the gas, got out the heavy frying pan, found bacon and tomatoes in the fridge, rummaged in the cupboard for ketchup. I just hoped the smell of frying bacon wouldn't wake her. I put the frying pan on, melted a bit of fat, and lowered the bacon on a slice. It fizzled. After a minute, the first tantalizing wisp of smell of frying bacon began to wreath around the kitchen. Soon, it would be through the door, then up the stairs, then under Dan's door. I turned up the heat carefully. I didn't want it to burn. The bacon spluttered, making a friendly sound in the kitchen. I laid the bread ready and sliced the tomatoes and prepped the ketchup bottle. A drop of hot fat sparked on the back of my hand, and I sucked it away. Dan, Dan, Dan. Dan would go to Mars and back if he thought he'd get a bacon sandwich at the end of it, Dad used to say. That was before Dad went. The kitchen door opened. Dan walked slowly, as if he was pushing through something heavy. His face was pale, and it wasn't as smooth and hard anymore, the way it had been the past 3 days. It looked crumpled, as if he was trying to remember something. "Your sandwich is nearly ready," I said. I took the bacon off the heat, slid the slices out of the pan, and laid them across the bread. I layered on the tomatoes, squeezed out just the right amount of ketchup. Then I cut the sandwich in half. Dan watched me all the time. I lifted my half and took a bite. I saw him lick his lips. But he was shivering, as if he felt cold. And things were moving behind his eyes, as if they were fighting for space there. "Dan," I said, "your sandwich is getting cold." His hands had dropped by his sides. They looked heavy. He didn't have the strength even to lift his hands, because all his strength was going into that fight inside him between Dan, who was my brother, and the stranger who wanted to make his home inside my brother's body. And that stranger was hanging on tooth and claw. It wasn't going to let him go easily. I knew now for sure that it was nothing human that was looking out of Dan's eyes at me. It had come from far away, and all it cared about was its resting place. It was here for a purpose. It didn't care for Dan, or me, or any of us. All it cared about was what it needed. Dan would never eat or sleep again if it had its way. "Dan," I said again. It felt as if his name was all I had. I came up close to him, with his half of the sandwich still in my hand. He backed off a step or two, but then didn't go any further. I knew it was the real Dan who wanted to stay. Suddenly, I remembered something from far back when I was sick with tonsillitis, not long after Dad died. It was when I was about 6, I think. I had to take medicine 4 times a day. I hated it. I used to press my lips tight shut, and Mum couldn't make me swallow it. Then Dan took the spoon. He didn't seem worried like Mum, and he didn't have any doubt that I'd open my mouth. He just put the spoon near my lips, without trying to push it into my mouth, and he'd say, "Come on, babes, do it for me." And I did. Every time, 4 times a day, till I was better. The words had been like magic to me when I was a little kid. Would they work now? Could they be the one thing that would bring Dan back and help him fight off that powerful and lonely thing which had come to make its home in him? I held the bacon sandwich up to Dan's mouth. His face was sweaty and he was breathing hard, as if he'd been running a long way. "Come on, babes," I whispered. "Do it for me." I held my breath. I said it again, but silently. Then, like something in slow motion, Dan's mouth opened. I could see how hungry he was, how much he wanted to come home. I felt the electrical prickle again, the one I'd felt when I first tried to open Dan's door. It was stronger now. It was trying to beat up a storm. It was fighting me as well as Dan. But this time, it wasn't going to win. Dan bit down. He bit into the white bread The bacon, which was still hot, the juicy tomato. I saw the marks of his teeth on the bread. He chewed and he swallowed the bacon sandwich. Then I looked at him, and it was like looking at a house where all the lights have come on at once after it's been empty for a long time. His hands weren't heavy anymore. He grasped the sandwich, bit again, and in a minute he'd finished it. You gonna make me another, Tony? Or have I got to show you about how a man from the army makes a bacon sandwich? He asked, and smiled. I didn't even jump when Mum opened the kitchen door. I knew it was her, not the thing which had been in here, and which was now gone. Mum pulled the cotton wool out of her ears. You boys, she said. I should have known. I was dreaming about bacon sandwiches. I don't know how Dan made up with Genevieve, but the next day she was round at our house again. Dan's bedroom door was open, and his music was throbbing through the house. Mum didn't tell him to turn it down. She was in a wonderful mood because the editor had rung back. He'd changed his mind, and he was going to run the story about the crop circles in the way Mum and her friend wanted. For some reason, he'd suddenly come to think it was worth printing the theory about aliens operating like bogus insurance salesmen, distracting us with corn circles and stealing our valuables when we weren't looking. I asked Mum, does the editor have kids? Yes, he's got a teenage daughter. She's been a bit of a problem lately, apparently. But he was telling me. Mum glanced round, saw Dan was laughing with Genevieve and whispered, his daughter's been acting a bit like Dan these past few days, I think. But he said she's got over it too. Genevieve stayed to supper, and you can guess what we had. While we were eating, I thought of what had happened the night before in our midnight kitchen. Aliens don't eat bacon sandwiches, I thought, looking at my brother. I've loved reading from a very young age. My mum tells me that my brother taught me to read, or helped teach me to read, with Thomas the Tank Engine books when I was a toddler. So by the time I got to 12 or 13 and bought that third World Book Day book with my £1 book token, it wasn't any kind of a revelation to me. But that story, I don't know, it sparked something. I've always been a big fan of horror. I ravenously consumed the Goosebumps books as a kid. I still have many of them on my shelves. And I moved on to point horror when I got a little bit older. But I was reading Stephen King by the time I was 14, 15, 16. And I think of all the stories and poems in that particular book, I think the reason I connected with that so much was that it felt kind of horror-ish. There was a thriller kind of element to it. The way Dunmore sort of describes how Dan is being trapped by this alien, and it's overtaken his body, and it's scary stuff. But Tony fights and he wins his brother back. It's a great story. It's got just the right amount of peril and familial ties, and it's and a happy ending, essentially. Like I said at the beginning, it's got a bit of everything. very fond of that book and that story, and it brings me a lot of joy to share that with you. And I'm certain that this is the longest video that we've done so far, and it's definitely indicative of what I hope to share more going forwards. I definitely want to do more short stories. I'm looking at some options. I've been gifted a number of short story books, so I need to find out where they are, because I'm terrible at having doom piles. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed that, friends. And maybe you're comfy and cozy now, because it's currently 20 to 10, so hopefully this will be uploaded by 9:45, and maybe you can listen to this to drift off. And if that's the case, then this will be the end of the video, and I dearly hope that after listening to all this chat, you can have a very peaceful sleep, preparing you for the week ahead. But I really hope you have a very good night.